what if I told you that the world's most famous stoner and a notorious Wolf of Wall Street were once trapped in the same 10 by 10 prison cell? This one secret encounter changed both of their lives and movie history forever. Think about the sheer absurdity of this setup. On one hand, you have Tommy Chong, the peaceful, weed-loving counterculture icon of the 70s who spent decades making people laugh at the mere idea of running from the cops. On the other hand, you have Jordan Belfort, the hyper-aggressive, money-obsessed, yacht-crashing archetype of raw capitalism who built an empire on financial devastation. These two men represent completely opposite ends of the American cultural spectrum. Yet, in the early 2000s, the gears of the federal justice system ground both of them down and spat them out into the exact same low-security prison camp in Taft, California. If not for a series of bizarre legal crackdowns, a lost piece of prison paperwork, and a shared cubicle, the cinematic masterpiece we know as The Wolf of Wall Street would literally not exist. To understand how this cosmic alignment even occurred, we have to look at the bizarre political climate of 2003. The United States government was deep into a highly publicized, multi-million-dollar federal sting operation known as Operation Pipe Dreams. The target was not violent drug cartels or massive international smugglers. Instead, the Department of Justice directed its massive resources toward high-end glassblowers and businesses selling drug paraphernalia. Tommy Chong's family business, which shipped glass bongs across state lines, became the prime target. The government wanted to make a high-profile example out of a counterculture celebrity to show they were serious about the war on drugs. Tommy Chong, always a peaceful advocate, took the fall to protect his wife and son, pleading guilty and receiving a shocking 9-month sentence in federal prison. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, the financial empire of Stratton Oakmont had completely collapsed. Jordan Belfort, the man who had defrauded investors of over $200 million through a massive pump-and-dump penny stock scheme, had finally run out of luck. After cooperating with the FBI and wearing a wire against his former associates, Belfort was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, ultimately serving 22 months. He was ordered to pay back over $110 million to his victims. But before we look at what happened when these two diametrically opposed worlds collided, we have to address a massive, mind-bending irony that the United States government completely overlooked. The Department of Justice spent tens of millions of taxpayer dollars on Operation Pipe Dreams, aiming to silence the country's most prominent advocate for marijuana and destroy his influence. Yet, by throwing Tommy Chong into that specific prison cell, the government accidentally funded and facilitated the creation of one of the most drug-fueled, anti-authority, hedonistic financial memoirs in human history. The very agency that sought to suppress drug culture unknowingly acted as the matchmaker that brought Jordan Belfort's wild story to life. Without the government's aggressive prosecution of a comedian selling glass pipes, Jordan Belfort's memoirs would have remained nothing more than unwritten jailhouse gossip, and Scorsese's legendary film would have never been made. When Belfort first arrived at the prison in Taft, California, the guards lost his registration paperwork. As a result, he was immediately thrown into solitary confinement for 5 brutal, agonizing days. He was completely isolated from the world, left with nothing but his thoughts and the dread of his impending sentence. When he was finally released into the general population, he was assigned to a shared cubicle. The prison staff, recognizing that both men were highly recognizable public figures, decided to pair them up. Belfort walked into his new living quarters, exhausted and shaken from solitary confinement, only to look up and see his new bunkmate, Tommy Chong. Chong was already established in the prison, treating it with his signature Zen-like calm, working on his own autobiography. When Belfort walked in, Chong remarked that it felt like Elvis Presley had just checked into jail. There was a natural curiosity between them. They were both famous, highly intelligent, and completely out of place. Every single night, after the guards conducted their final head counts and the lights went low, these two men would lie in their bunks and talk. Belfort, who was still trying to process the absolute madness of his former life, started telling Tommy stories. He spoke of crashing private helicopters on his front lawn, sinking a massive luxury yacht in the middle of a Mediterranean storm, flying on planes filled with sex workers, and consuming ungodly amounts of pharmaceutical-grade quaaludes while orchestrating multi-million-dollar financial frauds. Chong would lie in his bunk, rolling on the floor with laughter, completely captivated by the narrative. At first, Tommy didn't even believe him. He thought Belfort was just a brilliant, pathological liar making up the most insane fiction he had ever heard. It wasn't until Tommy asked his wife during a visitation session to Google this Jordan Belfort character that he realized every single word of these outrageous stories was completely true. When Tommy realized the sheer scale of Jordan's real life, he looked at him and said, "Dude, you have to write a book." At first, Jordan was highly skeptical. He didn't think his life was actually that interesting or that anyone would care to read about the internal mechanics of a penny stock brokerage. But Tommy, who was actively writing his own book at the desk every single day, inspired Jordan to pick up a pen. The dynamic between them became a daily writing ritual. Every night, the two cellmates would sit together in their tiny space, the silence only broken by the scratching of pens on paper. Jordan began emulating Tommy, trying to capture his thoughts and experiences on the page. However, Jordan's first attempt at writing was a complete and utter disaster. He didn't write about Stratton Oakmont or the wild, drug-fueled parties. Instead, he tried to write a fictional, highly stylized detective noir novel in the style of Dashiell Hammett. He wanted to write a pedestrian Hammett. He wanted to write a pedestrian courtroom thriller. When he finished the initial pages, he proudly handed them over to Tommy Chong for feedback. Tommy, who possessed a sharp creative mind and decades of storytelling experience, read the pages and was brutally honest. He told Jordan that the writing was terrible. He said it was pedestrian, unoriginal, and completely boring. He told him that anyone could go to a bookstore and buy 1,000 books just like it, and that Jordan was completely wasting his time trying to sound like someone else. This harsh critique absolutely crushed Jordan's ego. He was so offended by Tommy's blunt assessment that he refused to speak to his cellmate for an entire month. The silence in their shared cubicle was deafening. But during that month of silent resentment, Jordan spent hours in the small prison library. He stumbled upon Tom Wolfe's classic novel, The Bonfire of the Vanities, and began reading the works of Hunter S. Thompson. Suddenly, a light bulb went off. He realized that Tommy was completely right. He didn't need to write a generic legal thriller. He needed to write his own life story, and he needed to write it in his own raw, unapologetic, highly energetic voice. He needed to capture the fast-paced, chaotic, drug-addled environment of Stratton Oakmont exactly as it had happened. While Jordan was finding his voice, their life inside Taft Correctional Institution began to take on a highly unusual structure. They weren't just cellmates. They became part of an elite, self-sustaining community within the prison. They befriended another inmate named Eric Larson, a former PGA Tour caddy who was serving a long sentence for drug trafficking. Larson had established a massive, highly successful agricultural garden on the prison grounds. While the fresh vegetables grown in this garden were technically meant to be donated to local food banks, Larson was allowed to harvest enough to feed his inner circle. This core group, consisting of Tommy, Jordan, and Eric, formed a secret supper club. Every single evening, they would gather together and prepare healthy, organic, vegetarian meals. They used fresh onions, garlic, peppers, and tomatoes grown right there on the prison grounds. Tommy would joke that while the rest of the prison population was eating standard, bland, institutional food, their little group was dining like kings, eating healthy and staying in peak physical shape. It was a bizarre, surreal hierarchy. Here they were, a legendary comedian, a disgraced financial genius, and a professional caddy, living out their sentences by cooking gourmet vegetarian meals and writing memoirs in the middle of a California prison camp. This unique environment provided Jordan with the perfect environment to detox and rebuild his mind. For years, his brain had been completely fried by a cocktail of cocaine, quaaludes, and Xanax, operating at a frantic, destructive pace. In prison, under the steady, grounded, Zen-like influence of Tommy Chong, Jordan was able to channel his hyperactive, obsessive energy into a constructive, singular pursuit, mastering the art of writing. Tommy didn't just encourage him to write, he taught him how to structure a narrative, how to build tension, and how to capture the reader's attention. He forced Jordan to look inward and examine his own motivations, helping him realize that his obsession with wealth was a way of compensating for his deep-seated insecurities. The strategy worked perfectly. By the time Tommy Chong completed his 9-month sentence and was released back into the world, Jordan was fully committed to his manuscript. He spent every remaining day of his 22-month sentence writing, rewriting, and polishing his story. When Jordan was finally released from Taft and placed on probation, one of the very first things he did was drive straight to Tommy Chong's house in California. He didn't call ahead. Instead, he pulled up to the front of the house, held down his car horn, and began shouting from the street. When Tommy walked outside, he saw Jordan waving a massive stack of papers in the air, yelling, "I wrote it! I actually wrote the book!" That manuscript was, of course, the raw draft of The Wolf of Wall Street. When the book was published in 2007, it became an immediate global sensation, translated into dozens of languages and selling millions of copies worldwide. Publishers and film producers were captivated by the sheer audacity of the story. The book's massive success caught the attention of legendary director Martin Scorsese and superstar Leonardo DiCaprio, who spent years developing the project to ensure it captured the exact manic, unapologetic energy that Jordan had put onto those pages. When the film was released in 2013, it shattered box office records, earned 5 Academy Award nominations, and cemented itself as one of the most culturally significant movies of the 21st century. It launched a massive cultural phenomenon, inspiring countless memes, shaping modern finance bro culture, and redefining how Hollywood portrays the dark, chaotic underbelly of extreme wealth. Yet, when audiences watch Leonardo DiCaprio screaming into a microphone, throwing gold coins at his employees, or crawling toward his Lamborghini in a Quaalude-induced paralysis, they have absolutely no idea that the entire cinematic spectacle was made possible by a peaceful, 75-year-old stoner who got locked up for selling glass bongs. If the DEA had not targeted Tommy Chong, or if the prison bureau had not lost Jordan Belfort's paperwork and forced him into that specific cell, Jordan would have likely served his time in silence, returned to society as an obscure, forgotten white-collar felon, and his wild stories would have been lost to history. This incredible butterfly effect demonstrates how the most unexpected, contrasting connections can completely reshape popular culture. It shows that sometimes the key to unlocking your greatest potential can be found in the most unlikely places, guided by the most unexpected mentors, even while trapped inside a 10-by-10 prison cell. This bizarre chapter of cultural history raises a fascinating question about how our lives are shaped by the people we are forced to interact with in our darkest moments. If a legendary stoner can turn a disgraced corporate thief into a world-famous author, it makes you wonder what other secret, life-changing encounters are happening right now behind closed doors, completely hidden from the public eye. To truly understand how deep these weird historical connections go, we have to look at another bizarre coincidence involving Jordan Belfort's inner circle and a major Hollywood star that almost completely derailed the movie before it even started filming.